My name is Laura Horwood-Benton, and I'm the Public Programming and Community Relations Librarian at Portsmouth Public Library. And I have with me here Vicky Kaiser, who set out this year to read 100 books. And I believe you achieved your goal in October. Is that right?
I did.
How many are you up to now?
I'm about 3 short of 120.
Wow. So is that your goal for the end of 2020?
No, my goal was 100, and now I'm just reading because I just keep reading.
It's all gravy. So tell me more about the project. Why did you set out to read 100 books this year?
I started a few years ago. I used to work in the library with the kiddos at Dondero Elementary School. And I started using Goodreads as soon as I'd gotten an iPad. And they have that wonderful reading challenge that's built right in. Keeps track of your books, what you've read, and how far along you are in your challenge. And that inspired me initially to start. A couple of years into it, I challenged my kiddos to challenge themselves. And at that point, I decided I was going to go for 104 books, being 2 a week. Of course, the kids were overwhelmed with that. None of them were going to read that many books, but the idea was, this is what I'm doing and this is my challenge, and I'm challenging you to set yourself a goal. And then every year after that, I've just continued to do it. This year I just picked 100 because it was a nice round number. I knew I'd read more than that. But so it's just a way to keep track of what I'm doing. I love Goodreads. It's been a marvelous tool.
So this is not the first year that you've read 100 books.
Oh, no. I think I read 121 all told last year. Of course, I'm retired now, so I knew I'd have more time. And COVID has certainly increased that, because other things that I might have been doing stuck at home here by myself, I have more time to read and no excuse not to.
I love that, looking at the bright side of things during this weird time. So, yes, that's true. When you started out this year, did you read more in your favorite genre or genres, or did you try to pick books outside your comfort zone? What would you say is the balance?
I run a book club of current and past staff members at Dondero Elementary School. And in that situation, I try to select books that are a little bit more out of what I would read. I read a lot of different genres. I love mysteries. I love thrillers. I love fantasy. I love dystopian fiction. I try to incorporate a little bit of nonfiction. Generally, that tends to be more biographies and memoirs and that kind of thing. Although I did read In a Sunburned Country this year by Bill Bryson, which was wonderful. He's a very funny man, but I learned a lot about Australia. I really didn't know much about the country. So learning about the people, the flora and fauna of the country was all very interesting. Another nonfiction that I read was The Lion in Your Living Room. I am a cat owner, and this book is about cats and why we keep them. It was very eye-opening. It was really pretty amazing. Not the best book I've ever read, but very, very informative. A very interesting take on the whole idea of keeping cats as pets. So I try to read some nonfiction, but I'm kind of all across the board. I don't read a lot of science fiction. I love historical fiction too, again, because you're learning something at the same time. And reading is just wonderful because I'm so curious about the world, and it can take you to different places and introduce you to different ideas, help build your curiosity. I'm always looking up things that are mentioned in the stories to get the history, the background, or what does that mean, or where does that come from? What's the background from that? So reading just rolls into all of that, all the want to knows, and it keeps me rolling with that. So I read all over the place, all different kinds of things all the time. My only goal has been to read what I wanted to read and make sure that I did throw in some nonfiction. So I would say that would be the only caveat that I'd put on it. So
that's great. Thank you. And I think a good advertisement for one of the benefits of reading, as you say, satisfying curiosity, but also you learned about Australia through Bill Bryson, and that's the benefit of reading a book, is you can travel without ever leaving your house, especially when you're not even allowed to.
it's wonderful.
So I think you answered this a little bit already, but maybe there are additional things you want to share. What were some of your favorite things that you learned from a book this year?
Oh, this year. It's been, and I hate to say this, disappointing in a sense this year, although I read and enjoyed 119 books so far. I wouldn't say that I have found a lot of favorites. Okay, very enjoyable. I in the Goodreads rating system, 1 to 5 stars. Most things I rate 3 stars. It's a good book. I enjoyed it. I might recommend it to the right person. But a 4-star book for me is really rare. And I only came up with a couple of those this year. And there were some books that I was anticipating from authors that I enjoy, Ruth Ware for one, when her new book came out, highly anticipated because I had loved The Turn of the Key. And it just didn't grab me. Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern is one of my all-time favorite books of all time. Her use of language is just fabulous. And I was so looking forward to her new one. And again, I was disappointed. It's always hard. It must be so difficult as an author to come up when you come out of the gate so strongly, to try and match it or supersede. So I was disappointed with that. I think what I learned the most from this year was actually an older series of books, although he just released the last in the series this year, Bernard Cornwell's series, the Saxon stories. So much about English history, medieval English history. I mean, you know in your mind, Angles, Saxons, Vikings, Danes, but where it all fit into the picture and how it all happened. And such a wonderful central character in the story that it just carried you through. Tend to be just 12 books, I think, in the series. It's either the 12th or the 13th that has just come out this year. A lot of battle scenes, because of course, that's what generally history is wars and battles, taking over land and going for power. But the way Bernard Cornwell writes is very easy. I mean, I'm not a battle freak. I don't go for the battle stuff, but he's fairly brief. He gives you the setup and the strategy behind the battle, which I find interesting. And then you get through the battle, but he's very good with his characters. You get very involved with his characters. And so I enjoyed all of that. And then, of course, did a lot of research as I was reading them to fill in the different spots there. So that's probably where I learned the most this year, was that series.
I love that when a book sort of like kickstarts a whole other journey of learning. Like maybe you start the Wikipedia page and it leads you to other books, and then you all of a sudden, before you know it, this is like one of your favorite topics.
Yes.
It's a funny feeling. You talk about being underwhelmed with some titles. Was there anything that you couldn't finish or gave up partway through?
I didn't finish Erin Morgenstern's. Was that the Starless Sea?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't finish.
Do you feel like you went into that with expectations that were too high almost?
Probably. I do intend to go back to it with a different mindset. I read probably about a third of it, and I was definitely expecting more. I didn't see the language that I had so loved in The Night Circus. And although it's a total fantasy, it just wasn't, it just didn't grab me the way Night Circus had. It just wasn't, I think the opulence in the Night Circus lent itself to wonderful descriptors, where being underground in this kind of, it felt oppressive being underground, I think, in her new book. And it just didn't grab me. I will try it again, though. I will finish it eventually.
Yeah, I agree that The Night Circus was such a gripping book because, and as you say, it was a bit more expansive. There was sort of this whole world of possibilities that magic afforded these two people, but they were also constantly, you know, almost circumnavigating each other. They were always like in each other's orbit. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yes.
In a way that was like, you really wanted to know what happened. But it's funny that we talk about this book because there are a lot of people who are in the midst of a different kind of challenge right now, which is National Novel Writing Month. And usually the Portsmouth Public Library does a few programs around that. So that's where you try and write a novel, more like a novella, 50,000 words in a month. And I know from experience that when you get into that zone where you're really trying to hit a number count, that you get into kind of a frenzied, almost like feverish space. And I know that The Night Circus was originally written as a NaNoWriMo novel. So I wonder if there's something about the difference in energy that maybe because she had more time and space, she wasn't sort of like caught up in it in the same way that you really get when you're reading it as well.
That's a very interesting thought. You'll have to interview her.
Yeah, that's right. We'll see. So let's see. What else did I want to ask? So you talk about giving a lot of 3-star reviews to books for those listening, if you don't know, Goodreads does do a 1 to 5-star rating system. And sometimes I feel really limited by that because for one thing, I often find that a year later, I want to put up the score because I realize that there are things that have stuck with me where I rated it a 3 and really it's a 4 because I've been so affected by it, or, you know, pick your other numbers. But what are some 5-star books for you, whether or not they're from this year?
In looking over my list, because I was looking back, preparing for the interview, I find that most of them are fantasy, because I love the imagination. It can go anywhere. I loved the Outlander series. Love the Outlander series. I loved Robin Hobb's Farseer trilogy. It was fabulous. I loved The Ranger's Apprentice, which is actually an elementary school chapter book series by John Flanagan. Sort of a quasi-England medieval type of setting. Wonderful adventure series, wonderful characters, bonds between the characters. You just love them so much and want them to be together and want them to succeed, even though they're written for children, you know, roughly in the 5th to 6th grade range. You wouldn't know it to read it. It's a wonderful story. Just fabulous. So I loved all of those. The Night Circus, of course, which I'd already mentioned. Let me refer to my list here because I have such a long one. The Name of the Wind. Name of the Wind. Patrick Rothfuss is a genius. I love his books, and I wish he would finish the trilogy.
Oh, me too.
I would pester him about it because I think the more people pester him, the less likely he is to do it.
Totally. He's busy designing board games and things. He does all sorts of stuff, doesn't he?
Yes. So I would have to say that, yes, my absolute favorites, my 5 stars, tend to be in the fantasy realm. But again, the 5-star rating system does leave something to be desired, as you mentioned. You should have half stars. And I think a lot would depend on how much you'd read, because you get to a point where you read a lot of thrillers, and yes, they're great, they're fun, but you have to have a standard in your own mind as to what elevates it for you. I love the Louise Penny series because they're just so comfortable. The characters, Gamache is such a wonderful man. And I just think it's fabulous that Louise Penny actually based his character on her husband. I think that's just wonderful. And those all the characters that live in that little town of Three Pines, every time you pick up one of those mystery books, it's like going home, because you know them all so well and you've spent so much time with them. And they're all quirky and fun. So that's a wonderful place to be, but I don't know as I'd say they're my favorites. I mean, I get excited when a new one comes out, but I wouldn't give them 5 stars. So it's such a subjective thing, you know, it's to each person. So I just have in my own mind what qualifies for. And now I've forgotten what the question was.
That it was all relevant. Yeah. Well, some of the books you've talked about made me think you must have read Deborah Harkness's All Souls books, because they strike a similar, they hit a similar spot for me as Outlander and some of the other ones that you mentioned.
Yes, they were a lot of fun. I was very excited with the first one. The second one was very good, and the third one I bogged down on. It's very seldom that I do not finish a book, and that was another one that I got bogged down on. Again, I had such high expectations because I had enjoyed the other ones. As far as mystery, I have loved Elizabeth George and her Detective Linley series. That was a wonderful series too. A lot of 4s in that series for me.
That's great. So speaking a little bit more about ratings, you said you run a book club, and I know from my experience at the library, I help facilitate 3 different book clubs, LGBTQ book club, classics book club, and our speculative fiction book club, which encompasses fantasy, but also sci-fi and sometimes even horror, even though that's not my favorite. And I find, particularly with our speculative fiction book group, because it's a lot of the same folks who've been coming we just celebrated our 5th anniversary. So I know them, I respect their opinion. I have preconceived notions about what they'll like and not like, and then sometimes they surprise me. And I do find that I might walk away from a book, in particular, this happens a lot. I walk away from a book thinking that was just okay, or I didn't love it. And then once we've had an hour-long discussion, particularly with people who really loved it, I get much more of an appreciation for some of the nuances in it. Does that ever happen to you?
Absolutely. It's the second best thing to reading a book is talking to other people about books. And yes, and I think you can go back in Goodreads and change your rating. I think you can tap on a different one. So if you change your mind, you can go back, which is nice. I generally find that, yes, we have a couple of very astute people in our group, and they often pick up on things that I have not. And it has, to some extent, changed my opinion of some of the books that we have read. So, yes.
So, what books would you say you recommend the most to other people?
Well, this is a little off the beaten path. It's not anything that won any awards, but I'm very fascinated with the workings of the mind, the brain. I mean, it almost falls into the realm of fantasy because it's an undiscovered country. We still don't know what most of the human brain is. And I've recently gotten very interested in the literature about sociopaths because I just find it fascinating. I had started out getting interested in this kind of how the brain works kind of thing by reading Lisa Genova's book. I started with Left Neglect. Neglect or Left Neglected. I think it's Left Neglect, which is a syndrome, usually by some kind of blow to the head, where your brain, although your eyesight is fine, your brain only sees what's on the right. What's on the left just doesn't exist. The brain does not acknowledge it.
Whoa.
And the best way that I could describe it was an example that she gave in the book. The woman had a plate of food in front of her, and she ate everything that was on the inside. And her husband said, "Aren't you going to finish your dinner?" And she said, "I did." Because it just doesn't exist. And that to me is just so mind-boggling. No pun intended. It got me going on this curiosity about the brain. So then I stumbled at this book that's called Confessions of a Sociopath, and Hiding in Plain Sight is the subtitle. And it's written by a person who professes to be a sociopath. And it was eye-opening. According to the literature that I have read, 1 in 25 people is a sociopath. And that's basically, people automatically think psychopath, serial killer. And that's not it at all. That's the extreme version of. But your average sociopath is just someone who doesn't have any empathy or any conscience. And if you start reading about this, you try to wrap your head around it and try and understand what that might feel like. And it's so foreign to those of us who aren't sociopaths, because I count myself as not a sociopath, I just find it fascinating. So I would have to say that that was probably the most inspiring nonfiction that I've read in recent years, just because I find it fascinating.
I think a lot of people share that fascination, so that's a good recommendation. What book from this year in particular surprised you the most?
I don't know. How do you mean surprise? Like a surprise ending, or do you mean one that I wasn't anticipating liking and finding out that I did like?
You can interpret it however you want. Either of those kind of fell under what I was thinking.
I really don't know. You've got me on that one.
That's okay.
I do a lot of research. I read a lot of authors. I find an author that I like, as most people do, and I read a lot of their works if I've liked what they've written. So generally, you're not surprised there. You usually know what you're going to get, roughly. And then you start branching out and read other authors that are recommended as similar to. They said this was a disappointing year for me in that I didn't come across a lot that I was really overwhelmingly surprised by. It was all pretty much very enjoyable, but other than the Saxon stories, that was really my of the year. It was, and I would say that did surprise me, yes, because I wasn't expecting to like them so much. I had read Agincourt, which is another book by him, probably at least 15 years ago. And it was at the time that I enjoyed it because basically the whole book is a battle. And not being a battle person, I had not expected to, and I'd read it simply because it was good history, highly recommended, and I thought I would learn something, and was surprised at the time that I liked it. When I first picked up the Saxon stories, I didn't realize that it was the same author. And so I was surprised that I enjoyed them as much as I did.
Yeah, that makes sense. So do you have advice for people who would like to read more and would like to spend more time on reading or incorporate that more into their daily schedule? Is that a shift that happened for you? Were you always such a big reader? You know, what kind
Always.
of... Always.
It's never been a problem for me. I remember as a tiny child, my mother and my sisters and myself to the library. Lots and lots of, I remember sitting there reading Dr. Seuss because that was what I was at. Have always read. I come from a family of readers, which is a big plus, because if everyone around you is reading, they're saying, this is a really good book, you should read it. I remember at one point when I was in high school, my entire family, both of my sisters, my father and my stepmother, were all reading the John Jakes series, the American series, that started out with, I think The Rebel was the first one, if I can remember that far back. But we were all at different points in that series and we were passing the books around. It's like, will you hurry up and finish that because you have to read because I'm ready for it, finish it. So yes, having a family of readers has definitely been a big influence for me. If you're not a reader, and you want that as a goal, I guess like most habits, you need to decide time. Say every before I go to bed, I'm going to read a chapter or read for 15 minutes or something along those lines. I definitely think if you want to get into that habit, then you should find a subject or a genre that intrigues you, because that's going to keep you going. And with any luck at all, it will expand and you will expand and your likes and it will expand.
That's great advice. And I will say, I'm going to put in a couple of plugs here. The first is for the library. We have a great, we call it PPL Rex, Rex for recommendations, but we also have a little dinosaur, the PPL Rex. We have a form that you can fill out, one for adults, one for kids and teens, and tell us about some of your favorite topics, favorite genres, and we will create a book bundle for you that you can then take home, or we'll send you a book list by email if that's how you prefer to receive it. So we're always happy to recommend more if that's your goal, to sort of start down the path to more reading. But I also want to put in a plug, because I think both you and I would agree, Vicky, that this year things are going to be a little different for the holidays, but one of the best things you can do to spend time with somebody is to both read a book and then talk about it. And I wanted to put in a little plug for our two favorite local bookstores, which are River Run and Chic Street. And to also ask you if you have any particular recommendations for books that you think make good gifts for other people.
I know people do that a lot, but having worked in a library, I tend to take more of a personal approach. A person with a different book. I would have, kiddos come up to me all the time and say, well, I just finished this book and I want another one like it. And so you find them something that's up their alley, because not all books are for all people. There are some books that you just like so much that you tell people to read them, because necessarily they'll like them, but you just thought that, like Educated, everybody had to read Educated. It was a fabulous book. And Where the Crawdads Sing is another one that mass appeal, I think. But yeah, I tend to, as I'm reading books and reviews, I'll think, oh, this is a book that my brother would really like. And so I make note of it and then pass it along to him. So more tailored individual person than one general recommendation, I guess.
That's great advice, really. I'm at the end of my questions. Is there anything else you wanted to say in defense of reading 100 books in a year?
In defense of, well, I really need to get things done and stop so much, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I did also, when you're speaking of plugs, I happen to think of the feature that you have in the catalog, in the online catalog, of novelists, which I think a lot of people don't know about, which I'm always telling people that that's a good way to find a similar type of book if you don't know where to go next. I never have that problem, but
yeah,
I do recommend it to other people.
Right, you can look up a title, a book that you already know that you like, and if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll see lots of other books that share qualities with that book. And one of the nice things about Novelist is it tells you why. It'll say, well, we brought up this book because they're both lyrically written, or both fast-paced, or both gentle, and you can start to pick out, it helps you to pick out what kinds of things you like in a book as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
yes.
Definitely check that out in our library catalog. Thank you, Vicky. I can tell you're a pro.
Yes, lots of practice.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I think this will be a really enjoyable thing for folks to watch or listen to, and I really enjoyed talking with you today.
I enjoyed it myself. Thank you for having me.